Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Andrew, for opening in prayer for us. Today we're going to be turning, as you've guessed, into Acts chapter 23. It's the next step to our journey. Last week we were talking about unconditional love in the previous chapter, and I'll let you know once we've read it the theme for this chapter. So read with me, if you will, from Acts chapter 23, verse 1. We'll go back to chapter 22 from verse 30, just a couple verses previous, to remind us where we left off from last time. The next day, since the commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews, he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the Sanhedrin to assemble. Then he brought Paul and had him stand before them. Chapter 23. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck." Those who were standing near Paul said, "You dare to insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, stood up and argued vigorously. "We find nothing wrong with this man," they said. "What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him?" The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him from them by force and bring him to the barracks. The following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify about me in Rome." The next morning, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting to ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are now ready, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man and cautioned him, "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me." Then he called 2 of his centurions and ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide mounts for Paul so that they may be taken safely to Governor Felix." He wrote a letter as follows: "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to the Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him." So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antiochus. The next day they let the cavalry go on with him, while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived at Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. Okay. So Paul is in quite a predicament again, we see here. And what I'd like us to think about in this chapter is understanding different things. Understanding a conscience, your own conscience. He said at the beginning, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." It's important that we understand that our conscience before the Lord is valid, it's good, it's clear, it's open, it's completely transparent before God. That's one thing we can learn, one thing we can understand that needs to be in place, our conscience before the Lord. We need to understand when we are being mistreated. So that he had ordered to strike him. Ananias had ordered to strike Paul. And it's important to know when something is deserved and not deserved. And obviously this was out of place and it was not deserved. So it's important to understand what mistreatment is. And then what does Paul do? Paul says, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." Now that was a term that was very insulting to people who understood it at the time. And it's basically, a whitewashed wall was something that was like a dressing on a wall that was going to come to ruin at some point soon. It was inevitable that that wall was bound for destruction, and it's just been covered with this plaster to make it look pretty for now. And it often with a white paint or white color to it. So he was basically saying, look, you people are bound for destruction, and you're fools. And it's important to understand that, like we remembered last week, that the vengeance is the Lord's, it's not ours. And Paul was basically saying that God was going to judge these people for their actions. And it's important to understand that the Lord is the one who judges and repays mistreatment with his own judgment, and it's not us to come back to and do ourselves. However, he also recognized, when he understood when he was maybe in the wrong, and maybe even what he said wasn't out of place, but he showed lack of respect. He realized he showed lack of respect to whom he was talking, the way he said it. And in a sense, it doesn't say that he said he was sorry, but in a sense, he was apologizing, not realizing who he was talking to at the time. And he acknowledged that by saying, "It is written." Do you remember? It says, "For it is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people." So he had a very good understanding of the scriptures. He understood that he maybe spoke out of place in that setting, and he was ready to be humble about it and acknowledge that he was possibly in the wrong to voice it to the person he did at the time, based on his understanding of the scriptures and knowing what God wanted him to do. And then next part gets very interesting. As we begin to learn that it's very important to understand who our audiences are in front of us, whom we're with, who we're in the presence with. And right here we see Paul acknowledged he was with Pharisees and Sadducees. And whilst they had come together originally to judge Paul, he recognized right away a way that was going to distract the attention from what they had come to do against him. And he basically caused a big distraction by saying that he was talking about the resurrection. As we just reread this here again. I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead. Now, why did he say this? Well, he knows that a house divided cannot stand. And right here, the Pharisees and Sadducees had come together to bring Paul under judgment, but he knew what was going to set them off against each other, and therefore distracting everything away from solely on him. So now we have the Pharisees and Sadducees at it with each other, because this is a really deep-rooted difference between the two groups of religious people. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees didn't. And he knew this was going to set them all off. And he also knew that it was going to create a temporary alibi for him in this situation, because he started it off by saying, I grew up a Pharisee and I'm a son of a Pharisee. And there was no, that was completely true. There was no falseness to that, because he grew up, as we've learned in other chapters, as we've studied together, he grew up in a Jewish environment, and he learnt from very high quality teachers and leaders about the Jewish ways, and he grew up zealous in the Jewish beliefs. And so he was very much familiar with the Pharisee side of things. And so he was very wisely creating an alibi whilst distracting the sole attention of the judgment on him away by creating this uproar between the two sects. So that was very interesting, and that's why I say it's very important to understand who we're in the presence of, to really understand, to know how to make the situation better, direct the situation to the way God would see it go. That's our aim, isn't it? And so by knowing who is with us, we can, if we know the people, then we know how they think, how to get them thinking better, how to rechannel their thoughts in a way. And so this was what was going on. So now we're getting on to verse 11 in this chapter, when God is the Lord is talking to him, and he says, "Take courage, as you have testified me about in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." So right here, Paul is in the middle of this big dispute. He's in this big spiritual fight, you could say, because right now he's had to deal with this in Jerusalem, and now he's got to deal with it all again in Rome. And it's just like when a coach comes to the corner of a boxing corner, somebody who's in a fight, and there's different rounds, isn't there? And there's different rounds. And I know the subject of boxing is very controversial, so we're not going to get into the sport itself. But just for a picture, when you have a good coach in your corner between the rounds, it encourages you to get through that next round, to get through that next fight. And as we remember, if we go to 2 Timothy chapter 4, we'll remember something here that can remind us of the fight. 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 7, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." This was the aim. This was the aim of Paul, to fight the good fight. As Christians, we're not going to avoid fights. We want to avoid what we can, and especially physically. But here there was something different. There was a big spiritual fight happening, and Paul wasn't ignorant of this. He knew that he was in a very deep spiritual battle here, and he was in a big fight. But it wasn't a fight that was, in a sense, a negative one. It was a good one. It was a good fight. It was a fight that must be had. It was somewhere God had sent him, and he was doing it with every piece of wisdom he knew how. And now we have the Lord encouraging him between places, between Jerusalem and Rome. And then I'd just like to turn together to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And we'll read from verse 24. "Do you not know that in the race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." This is the key verse here. "Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." So verse 26 here is talking about when he says not running aimlessly, he's focused on where he's going. He's focused in the race to run straight, to do what is required, to not be distracted by those circumstances around him. And then when it says, "I do not fight like a man beating the air," that's basically saying, I'm not like a boxer who is throwing punches that is wasting them, that is missing. Every blow counts, and every blow matters, and he's careful about how he does it, and he makes sure that it is the right way, and that God is behind it all, and that he's not wasting his time or doing something that is going to compromise what God's plan is for him to serve him. So then back to Acts. So then what happened? There was a plot to kill him because of all this now. I think this is getting really deep evil things here now. There's a difference, I believe, with murder murder is still murder and it's wrong. But this has gone to the next level. This is plotting. This is going even beyond plotting. This is taking an oath. And this is very carefully planned out murder, and this is where things get really evil. However, in verse 16, it tells us that Paul has a nephew, his sister's son. And likely this tells us something a little bit about his nephew as well, just quickly. It's basically saying that he must have been growing up in the same kind of environment and culture as Paul was, because why would he have had ears to any of what was going on? He must have been within those circles of some kind to be retrieving this information. So we're not going to go in any further to his nephew, but that just gives us a background a little bit about his nephew. And it was a good thing his nephew was there, because he was able to tell the commander, and that got the commander in a good state of mind and wisdom to know how to handle it correctly, or what was about to happen. So he ends up going and getting 2 centurions. Now what are centurions? Centurion is a commander of 100 soldiers. So it's no wonder it says, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. He was making sure that things were prepared in place so that Paul was not going to be ambushed like these religious people had planned to do. And therefore, this brings me to my final point here for this chapter for today, is that we understand ourselves, that who we are, where we're born, what our personality is, what we do in life. It's no accident. It's no accident that Paul was a Jew and grew up in a Pharisee environment. It's no accident that he was also a Roman citizen. We can see this here. We can see that behind the way the story unfolds is exactly because of who he is, what he has done, how he's been raised, his personality, what God has changed in his life to bring him to the circumstance where he is. He's not still going off trying to kill Christians. He is one. So what I'd like you to do is to think about what your understanding is of who you are, where you are, what your personality is, what your gifts are, what are your spiritual gifts. If you don't know, it's important you find out and ask somebody, because God wants to use them. And it's important to understand that the circumstances that come up in our lives are no accident. Yes, we'd love to avoid pain. Yes, we'd love to avoid circumstances that we wish we never had to go through, or we know that we don't want to go through. But guess what? There's a silver lining. One day there is a place for that to occur. When we can be in heaven, then there is no more pain, there is no more awkward or terrible circumstances we have to be in. But for now, we're in these circumstances for a reason. Paul was in that circumstance for a reason, and he understood it. He understood who he was, what God had done for him, why he was there, why he was going through what he had to go through. And to be honest, he didn't understand everything. He didn't understand that over 2,000 years later, everything that would be even unfolding right now in this very room, us talking about what is going on and how we can connect this story to our own situation today so that we can understand what God's purpose, individual purpose, is for us. So, if anything today, I'd like you to go away and think about who you are, where you are, why you have the gifts you do, how you can use them, and reevaluate what your purpose is. Reevaluate, why am I going through this? It's no accident you're going through it. Does God want you to be in that suffering? No, He doesn't. But you're going through it because you have, it's part of the purpose that you will soon find out, that will later unfold, that maybe you will be the person to help somebody else going through the same circumstance. You have been there. You will then have understood why things were so hard, why you had to go through this. We can't understand everything for everybody. We can't, because we can't all go through what everybody goes through. So we all have our own purpose. We all have our own experiences to go through, to work through, and to then and to understand, so that we can help one another, and so that we can serve God in a way that pleases Him, so that we can aim where He wants us to aim in our run, in our race, so that when we're fighting, that every punch counts, matters. It's not wasted, and not in a violent way, but in a positive, good fight way, as we've talked. So just think about these things. I ask, let's pray.
The Lord Himself shall come and shout the quickening word. Thousands shall answer from the tomb, forever with the Lord. Knowing as I am known, how shall I love that word? How oft repeat before the throne, forever with the Lord.